deal. He's like, all right, Chris Eldridge, he's gonna play this all by himself, break a leg, critter. So on this radio show with 3 million people listening out in radio land, I was playing, I couldn't find it, and I just literally stopped and I go, I done lost it.
In this interview, I sat down with Grammy winner and founding member of the Punch Brothers, Chris Eldridge. He shares the story of the train wreck performance that led to one of the most valuable lessons in his musical career. He unpacks the bizarre practice habit that he picked up from his studies with Tony Rice that completely changed the way that he approaches tone and touch.
And he was like, critter, what the hell are you doing with that?
And he explains how relearning theory backwards finally made it click. Whether you're a professional musician, a hobbyist, or somewhere in between, this conversation will change the way that you think about mastery, ego, and what it really means to grow as a musician. By the way, I'm Spencer from Sonora Guitar Intensive, and this is a brand new channel that we're building in partnership with our friends at Carter Vintage Guitars here in Nashville, Tennessee. We're trying to create the kind of music content that we wish existed.
Every time I sit down, I want to make a hit.
Real conversations with world-class musicians, talking about stuff that usually gets left out.
That's when you start getting to the nitty-gritty of things, you know.
And honestly, we're figuring this out as we go. Every comment, every like, every subscribe tells the YouTube algorithm that this is something that's worth showing to more people. And with that, let's get into it. This is Playback. Welcome to Playback.
Hey, it's very nice to be here.
Thanks for making the time to hang out.
Of course.
I am curious, there's a whole bunch of things I want to talk about today. But I'm curious to both learn about you and your background and also the things that you nerd out on the most. But maybe a good place to start would be, what was your path into music?
I exist because of music. My parents are both 5-string banjo players. That's what like brought them together.
Yeah, banjo love.
Banjo love, which is a scary thing, but you know. But anyway, it at least it got me here. Yeah, so my dad was a really great bluegrass musician. His name was Ben Eldridge. He passed away last year, but he was a founding member of amazing bluegrass band called the Seldom Scene. And so I kind of grew up. I was fortunate that I just kind of got to grow up in this like ultra privileged place, and that my dad was just in this like incredible band, and his bandmates were these incredible musicians, and they made incredible music, and that was just this natural thing that was around. Also on my mom's side, who was also a banjo player, that's how they met, but she came from this family of real music lovers. Her parents met through a kind of really deep love of classical music. Like my grandfather, he wound up being a physician, but he was his undergrad, he was like a music, history major. He just loved music. And so that was kind of their thing. So she grew up in this household where music was really sacred, but it wasn't just that, classical music. I mean, it was all kinds of stuff. And so that really got passed on to her. And so I grew up that way. Like music, when Mom and I were hanging, like just listening to music was just like this sacred thing. And there was so much cool music.
Do you remember the first time? I know Tony Rice is very central to your playing and the way that, the way that you approach the guitar. You can hear a lot of Tony. Do you remember the first time you heard Tony play?
No. Well, so again, my dad played with Tony. They were friends, and my dad actually played on one of his records, California Autumn. So Tony was this guy who was like part of the community. So I didn't really. He didn't strike me as anything wild when I was young, because again, like he was just, oh, it's Tony, Yeah. And then my mom, when I was maybe, I think 14, she gave me this Tony Rice record, Acoustics, which was kind of his first kind of jazz record, that he made independently after he'd been playing with the David Grisman Quintet. And that music was cool to me because it had some harmonic sophistication. It was a lot more sophisticated harmonically and rhythmically than most bluegrass. It was very clear, very, very knotty and dense, but also very organized, but also really organic. I mean, it had all these things that really appealed to me about the other music, but it was acoustic music. And I started trying to play it, and for the first time I started being able to actually play, because I was terrible at electric guitar. I was like not a guy who took to it well. There were like some things missing, some like synapses that hadn't gone all the way closed for me, where I just couldn't quite hit it. But when I picked up the acoustic guitar, things started started to kind of click.
How old were you at that point?
I think I was 14. I think I was, yeah. I mean, I remember it clearly. I got that CD for Christmas when I was in ninth grade.
I guess I'm surprised. You have two banjo-playing parents, and they were they encouraging of like putting an instrument in your hand really early, or were they sort of waiting for you to have an interest in it?
They were pretty cool about, yeah, about letting me have an interest in it. But it was, they're like, I remember there was, those like grease splatter things that you put on top of like a frying pan. Like we had one of those, and I used to carry it around when I was a little kid because it looked sort of like a banjo. Yeah. And I think they thought that was cool. We used to sing, but yeah, nobody pushed it. I mean, I took piano lessons at the mall I went like 2 or 3 times when I was probably like 7, and just like could not have been less interested. Mm-hmm. But yeah, when I started playing, they were just really supportive, and I was lucky. I grew up in a house with, I had a good guitar. Yeah. My dad had it was this 1983 Martin. That was the 150th anniversary of Martin guitars. So that was like, generally speaking, not, it was like a sort of in a dark era for Martins. There's some great guitars, but like those 1983 anniversary guitars, there's some really good ones. They're made of Brazilian rosewood, and they just built them a little differently. And anyway, so I grew up playing this good guitar, which helped. They were supportive. I had some resources in that way, and I could just play with them. I think the biggest thing though was just seeing that it was normal, like having this idea that there's nothing extraordinary about it. It's just like a thing that you can do, and that doesn't mean that you don't work really hard on it. Like, of course, I got super 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 obsessed, as everybody who does this,
Do you remember how you approached that? Like when you were in high school, how did you tackle the task of like understanding the bluegrass idiom and kind of getting inside it?
Oh, well, it was all very natural for me. I mean, I guess it wasn't even bluegrass so much. I mean, I was just kind of working on guitar, and in my own way, I took some lessons at the local guitar store, but I didn't, they taught me like, here's a pentatonic scale, here's a major scale. But they were cool, but fundamentally, I kind of just like to play the guitar. I just like to experiment. And, I started having insights at a certain point of like, oh, that scale that I was taught, to play like this. I realized one day, well, I don't, like, some of those notes can be found in other places. Like maybe I could just do it. Oh, whoa, that's crazy. And then like, what if if I can do it there. Oh, well, there's that last note again. Maybe I could do it like this. Whoa, maybe I could like check, like maybe I could change all of them. Oh, add 2 on that. So maybe do 3 on that. It's just like this process of like iterating and realizing that there were different ways to do the same thing. And for whatever reason, that was just interesting to me, because the guitar turned into like a puzzle. Like to me, it was this cool puzzle to try and unravel and understand. And again, I'm pretty much self-taught. I took lessons, but fundamentally, I definitely view myself as having taught myself most of this stuff. But the thing for me that maybe enabled that was that I just was curious and kind of fascinated with the guitar as this puzzle. And I also stayed inspired because there was still music. I mean, I listened to music all the time, and I had these people who were heroes, and it's like, I want to do that. And so much of like growing and progress, I'm certainly not putting myself in the category of somebody who's like, advancing things, but like what just happens is everybody stands on the shoulders of giants. It's like you hear that somebody can do a thing, and so that becomes like the normal thing that you aim for. And so I was just fortunate that I got to listen to these extraordinary people, and so I like the thing that I was aiming for was somewhat elevated, and that's like a cool thing that we kind of all have access to now.
As a self-taught guitar player, what is your relationship to like music theory and kind of getting inside of sound intellectually and kinesthetically?
I was fundamentally disinterested in theory and oral skills, because I was like, at this point I'd settled into my dream was to like be playing with like, Bailiff and Tony and Mark O'Connor and Edgar. It was like that. I kind of found this Feely. I'd found this kind of world of music that really spoke to me. That had kind of some of the rigor and the kind of cool density that I really liked and elegance, but it still was rooted in string band music. And I was like, why do it's still kind of bluegrass. And so, but I had to take these classes, and I actually really struggled with them. I literally failed. I'd never failed, like, I was always a pretty good student, but I actually failed music theory one semester, and I failed oral skills. And it was, which was weird because I had a really good ear, but for me, what was so hard was I'd learned, because I taught myself. It was very hard for me to kind of take the way I understood music and take this other way that they were teaching me to understand music and map them together. They didn't really map onto each other. But it was like, a good analogy would be like, it's like somebody who like learns to be fluent. Like you go and live in, France or something like that for, and you speak the language fluently, but you've actually never seen a book before. And then you're like, oh, you go to college, but you've never read a book and you don't know how to read. That's what it was like for me. And so I got through, I got through and I graduated and all that eventually. But at that time, it was such a struggle to kind of just rise to the level of being able to read a book, that I wasn't rocking it on that level. But over time, after we started Punch Brothers, I was playing all this really, really complex music. And my natural intuition and natural musicianship kind of, I reached the ceiling, at some point in the first couple of years with Punch Brothers, of like what I could my natural intuition could do. It was like, I need to understand what's happening on. And so the fact that I'd taken those classes, again, I had the tools to teach myself theory. And so I kind of taught myself. Yeah. And now I really think about that stuff, a decent amount. I'm fairly aware of what's happening. And I, when you look at the guitar, just to see, well, that's a G chord, there's a B, there's a G, there's a D. It's like another big thing that's so important that every guitar player, I think, should do. Really, really important. And it's entirely doable. It's like learning your time stables. It's just learning all the notes on the guitar. But at Oberlin, like when I was in those classes, like I didn't even know I didn't know what notes I was playing. I could play a lot of stuff. I could play pretty crazy music, actually, but it was like a map of sounds and shapes is kind of how I understood it. I understood physical relationships to sounds.
What's the utility of, there are two very distinct camps in that particular topic. It's like some people are like, you don't need to learn the notes on the E and the A string so that you can kind of reference root notes.
Yeah.
But you don't need to learn all the notes across the fretboard. And others who are just like, it is essential to learn all of the notes across the fretboard.
Yeah.
In your eyes, what's the utility of having that level of fluency?
Oh, well, it's just clarity. You don't have to have it. I'm not sure that. Who knows what Robert Johnson knew, and that's like some of the most powerful music, ever. Changed music. Changed music in the 20th century. So you definitely don't need any of that stuff. But if you're trying to actually grow as a musician and you're trying to become fluent and you're trying to be in a position where you're not going to be stuck with like if it's hard to dream up new stuff, there's this very easy thing you can do, which is you can just learn what all the notes are. Because for instance, if I know where all the G's are, and I know where all the B's are, I can okay, here's an example. Like I've always struggled with like half diminished chords. I think a lot of people are probably like, half diminished chords are kind of weird. It's hard to memorize them, like all that kind of stuff. And I just realized the other day, I should have known this, graduating from Oberlin, but again, I wasn't interested in it back then. But recently there was this great tune, Falling Grace. Anyway, it's this really nice tune, but it goes, you get a few half diminished chords. And I could, when I was trying to improvise over that, a buddy of mine showed me the tune, and I was like, oh, it's a really cool tune. And I always would fall on my face on that part of the tune. I just never could play anything intuitively that was good. And I realized, like, oh, a half diminished chord. Finally, it was the necessity of needing to do something. The fact that I had this knowledge, I was like, oh, right, a half diminished chord is actually, like this F sharp half diminished, there's actually a triad in there. There's an A minor triad. A triad is a very basic musical structure. It's like one of the most basic things you could learn. Probably most people watching this know what a triad is, right? But just the idea that, like, I could just really think about this very simple A minor triad. I could play any A minor thing. And then if I know where there's an F sharp as well, this is, I've never played that voicing of an F sharp half diminished before. I mean, I probably have, but like I certainly am not thinking of that like, oh, here's my major set, here's this shape somebody taught me. Like I just came up with that on the fly because I know that this is A minor and there's an F sharp. And all of a sudden there's this beautiful voicing that's pretty rich sounding, kind of interesting. And it's that sort of on the fly thinking is enabled by just having those resources there. It's very knowable. I really, that's the thing that my friend Julian Lage says all the time, talking about like the notes on the guitar or scales. He says it's very knowable.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about your relationship to Tony Rice's playing, and what I'm curious to hear, like what aspects of Tony Rice's playing have you sort of grabbed onto the most and tried to incorporate and embody yourself?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, yeah, I mean, Tony, he was like the greatest bluegrass guitar player ever. Because what he did so artfully is he assimilated everything that had happened in bluegrass guitar up until that point. He assimilated the incredible drive that Jimmy Martin brought. But he assimilated the kind of directness that like Lester Flatt had. I mean, these are the guys who were just at the very beginning playing with Bill Monroe. He assimilated Clarence White, and when Clarence started playing lead stuff, some of the kind of fearless stuff that Clarence would do, some of the drive of Doc Watson, but in Tony's own way.
Do you think he was intentional about that?
Yeah, he was definitely. I do. I had an experience, like when I was a kid, when I was in college actually. Oberlin had this thing called winter term where you could go the month of January. It's like design a project. And go execute it. You'd have to get it approved by somebody, by a teacher, but because I knew Tony. Basically, to make a long story short, my dream project was like, oh, it would be great to go to Tony's house and study with Tony, because he'd kind of taken me under his wing a little bit at that point. I was serious, and we knew each other, and he'd been really nice to me and really encouraging, and had been cool. So anyway, I called him up. I was like, could I come down there for, winter term? And he was like, I thought there's no way in hell. I mean, Tony was so mysterious and so untouchable in a way, even to those who. I was like, there's no way he's going to say yeah. He was like, yeah, it sounds cool. Come on down. So I went down there, and I'd never seen this before as somebody who was watching and just like, because Tony was such an icon, and he was so individual and again, so mysterious. I mean, he just cut such a strong figure. But when I was down there and he was playing me a lot of music, I realized like, oh, wow, he loved Jerry Reed. And there's this Jerry Reed record called Jerry Reed Explores Guitar Country, I think. And like, I think more than half of that record, like Tony recorded those songs over the course of his career, often playing Jerry Reed's arrangements. And there were these things that like I grew up thinking like, I can't, like, what a cool idea Tony had. He did that thing. And but no, it was like he was just a fan of Jerry Reed, and he was like, it was Jerry Reed's arrangement. We just didn't realize that. Or I remember one time actually we were sitting in his basement listening to that record, and there's this amazing recording of Georgia on My Mind that Jerry Reed plays, and it's got this, the second verse. Jerry Reed does this cool things like Georgia. How's it go? something like that. But it's like this amazing gesture that Jerry Reed does. And Tony picked up the guitar and he played it, and I was like, "What? You've like learned stuff? Like nobody thinks of Tony Rice that way, you know? They don't think that he's like learned, but and you certainly would never hear him play that on stage, but no, he'd studied that stuff, and he knew it, he'd learned it. So I think that and he used to talk to me about. He was the first person who played me Heifetz, the great Russian violinist Yasha Heifetz, one of the great violinists of the 20th century for sure. And Heifetz, played with so much power and so much clarity, like superhuman clarity. And as a bluegrass guitar player, if you think about Tony Rice's music, especially once his first few records, he hadn't developed this yet. But by the time the early 80s hit, late 70s, early 80s, like you hear that sound and it has so much clarity. It's insane how much clarity there is to that. And I realized oh, that's Heifetz, He's been listening to Heifetz, and we even talked about it explicitly because he played me some Heifetz stuff. And so you kind of realize that even a guy like that is a student. Anybody who's great is a student. To Julian Lage, who's to me at this point I think one of the most just breathtakingly epic guitarists in the world. Julian's my good buddy, but I really look up to him. But I think of Julian as the more than anything, he's a master, but more than anything to me, he's the ultimate student. I see him as just the archetype of the ultimate student. But then if you kind of stay true to that and you walk that path every day, you become, it sounds so cheesy to use these words, but I'll do it. You become a master, Yeah.
I think that's so real.
Yeah.
That's so real. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you were talking about standing on the shoulders of giants earlier. I think that's what it looks like. It's just learning the source material enough that it gets integrated. That's super cool. I want to learn about mindful practice from you. I know it's something that you talk a lot about, and I believe you taught a course on sort of mindful playing. Could you kind of break down what that means for you?
Yeah, well, to me, it's just, well, a lot of this is actually stuff that I sort of got indirectly from Tony, and when I went down and stayed with him, we never once played a tune together, and now I kind of regret, because that would have been just fun to just sit and pick tunes, but we didn't do that. What we did is we listened to music. Sometimes we handed the guitar back and forth, but we mostly just listened to music, and we talked about music, and we observed things that we loved about music, and we had conversations about what it is to be a musician, why we would be a musician. And I think a lot of that really kind of informed my thinking about music, because before that it was so much about just playing the guitar, which is really fun. And like I said earlier, there's the guitar is this amazing puzzle, and you hear people play the guitar and they're just either shredding or they're just playing something so beautiful it just hits you right there, or whatever it is. It seems fun, but there's this other side to music making, which is just where all that's coming from, where the motivation for that is coming from, who you're serving, what you're serving when you do that. And so that's a thing that I like to think about and encourage people to think about, because I think, for me, just again with Tony, at that point I was 19 years old, and I wanted to be this incredible shredding guitar player, and I had these ideas that I'd take all my Eric Johnson stuff and big intervals and and put it in bluegrass and be like, wow, nobody's heard that before, wow, and Tony, he literally, I was playing his guitar in his basement one day, and I was just noodling around, but I remember I was playing that song. I was playing Cattle in the Cane and doing these all that kind of stuff, and he was like, Critter, what the hell are you doing with that? And I was just like, wow, I'm just working on my stuff, he's like, well, you have to think about why you're doing what you're doing. And he said this thing that I've said it in like every interview I've ever done in my life, but it's because it's so simple and so profound. He basically was asking me what I was hoping to accomplish, why I was doing that, like what, and he said, well, the main thing, the only thing that really matters when you're making music, and kind of the best way to orient yourself, or a way to orient yourself is, like he said, it's really this simple. You're just trying to collaborate with your fellow musicians to make sounds that are pleasing to the ear. Like it can be just that simple. And just that him saying that was a very that was kind of like this pivotal moment for me, because it was like a light bulb went off, which kind of took making music less, it took it from a place of being about me, and even my fascination, although I think that's cool and still cool, and I love hearing people do that, but like and it made it more about serving music. Do you know what I mean? It just took it outside of being so egocentric. And he had that. I thought that was just a really cool way of raising that idea, because I think a lot of times a lot of us kind of get into a pretty egocentric place with our music making, and it can lead you into dangerous territory. Your ego, I think, can lead you to work really hard, because you want to show everybody what you can do and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of a dangerous tool to play with, because it can also, the flip side of that is, if you mess up, then and you're playing from an egoic sort of place, then the only logical conclusion that you have to accept is that I suck.
Yeah.
If you've set up your value system around like being awesome and showing everybody what you can do, if it doesn't go well, it's almost like, if you were going to take the glory from that, if it doesn't go well, it's almost like, well, you got to take the opposite. You have to take the like punishment. And that's just not the way it needs to be. It can be about something a lot more kind of joyful and kind of human, and about connection, which I think then takes a lot of the pressure off, and we can be a little bit more liberated to just kind of play in a more playful, open way.
I remember when you taught for some of the Sonora students, you shared a story that really stuck with me, because it's so relatable, around a performance, and maybe you know which story I'm talking about.
Oh, the Joe Pass thing?
Would you mind sharing that story?
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah, it really hits.
Yeah, well, okay, so I used to play guitar on, Chris Thiele was the host of this radio show. It used to be Prairie Home Companion, but then they changed the name to Live From Here. Anyway, it was a, radio show syndicated very widely on NPR. It was on like, 600 NPR stations around the country, and it's like sort of this flagship NPR show, so it had a huge listenership. And anyway, I was the guitar player most of the time on that show, and we would have this segment where we do like this musician's birthday thing, and we'd play something, musicians who were born that week that we were doing the show. So maybe like whatever, May 7th to 14th or whatever. We'd cover some of their stuff, and this next show, it was going to be Joe Pass was born that week, the great jazz guitar player. And so Thiele called me up and he was like, "Hey, it's Joe Pass's birthday this week. Would you want to learn a Joe Pass thing? Would you be up for that?" And I thought about it for a second. I was like, "Yeah, I'd definitely, I'd do that." Because a lot of times, I wasn't front and center on that show, and it seemed fun and it'd be cool, like, to learn something. And so I said yes, and I went and checked out his record Virtuoso, which, if anybody has not listened to that record, like, that's one of the great guitar records. It's just solo guitar, Joe Pass. And I really was vibing with his arrangement of Round Midnight. So I was like, okay, I'll learn Round Midnight to play on the radio for, an audience of 3 million people in 4 days. and I worked really hard, but I was like, I can do that. I can do this. And this is going to be, it's like secretly the little voice in the back of my head, the not helpful one, was like, this is going to be your time to shine, baby. you know? And I worked super hard, I was practicing, many hours a day. I was practicing the way that I used to practice like when I was 16. I was practicing like probably like 8 hours a day, that week, trying to learn this thing and get it good and get it strong. And it was coming really from Thiele offered me the chance. He'd offered me the chance to do this thing, and so I guess anybody would want to do well, but I feel like I let my ego get a little too involved. And so anyway, but that gave me this incredible fuel to work super hard, to work in a way that I just hadn't worked in, 15 years or whatever. And I worked really hard, and I got it down, and I could really play the shit out of it. I had it, so it was strong. I was rocking it, and I was like feeling good about myself. And anyway, when we got to the show, because I started getting really nervous, like I just started getting really nervous, and halfway through the show, like my knees started shaking, and I saw the birthday segment's coming up, and after these next few things, I was just getting more and more nervous. And the reason I was getting so nervous was because I'd put so much of my own self-worth and identity on the line, because I had worked hard on this thing, and I'd gotten it to a place that it was really strong. But because I did it from this egoic place, and that was going to somehow lift me up, it made me incredibly vulnerable. And then I could be, and if I'm vulnerable, then I'm going to be scared, and yeah, I mean, what you would expect, so Thiele's like, all right, Chris Eldridge, he's going to play this all by himself, break a leg, critter. Good luck. And I made it in, about a quarter of the way through, and I messed up. It was the hardest part. It was the part that I knew that I was the most worried about. And sure enough, I messed it up. But because it was around midnight, and I'm not really a jazz player, I couldn't find my way back onto it. I wasn't fluent with that tune. I'd gotten really good at playing Joe Pass's arrangement. I hadn't gotten good at playing around midnight. That's kind of a whole other side discussion. It's like people who learn something from tablature. If you mess something up, you're screwed. But if you actually know how the tune goes, you can do it. Well, I essentially had gone the tablature route on this, and in terms of how I'd learned it, because the timetable was really compressed, and I wasn't able to teach myself to be totally fluent with this thing at that point. Anyway, so I messed up, and I just couldn't get back on. And so on this radio show with, again, so 3 million people listening out in Radio Land, and not to mention the 2,000 people that were in the auditorium in front of us, I was playing, I couldn't find it, and I just literally stopped, and I go, I done lost it. Was the quote, because I was like, if I talk like a hillbilly, they'll just take, they'll be like,
get grace.
What was he doing trying to play Joe Pass? And it was so mortifying. I mean, it was like, dude, it was so mortifying. It was like one of the most definitely peak mortifying experience of my life. And
it's so relatable, though. Yeah, that's not the playing in front of 3 million people. I don't think that's as relatable.
Yeah.
But I think the experience of ego getting in the way, or just wanting something to go so well for you, that it gets in the way of the music that wants to happen.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it can block you up, and it can take over, and that voice can be really powerful. And if you feed that voice, it's going to be loud in there. It's going to be saying, it's going to be taking up a lot of your bandwidth. Yeah. And so you have to be careful. So anyway, I wound up taking a mulligan in the encore, and it was fine. I still didn't crush it, but it was fine. And that's actually on YouTube, but thankfully they stitched that, they put that up on the internet. But it was really hard, and I was very, very, very sad all night. very miserable. Everybody else was celebrating. It was a good show otherwise. We were in Kansas City. We had some friends on the show who were like some of the musical guests. And I just like was just, in the pits, I was feeling so bummed and just kind of almost inconsolable all night. Just didn't want to talk to anybody. Just like, And eventually, we got back to the hotel after going out to this tiki bar, and I just because I'd felt so bad for like 7 hours. I just was like, man, this sucks. I do not like what's going on. And it actually wound up being a really positive experience because I went so far down into this thing. I mean, life can definitely get worse, but that was pretty bad. And all the other thing that was so tough about it was not only that I failed in front of all those people, but that I failed so badly, because I can't think of another time, even on like a very small scale, where I've had such a complete epic fail where I couldn't even keep playing. I mean, it was like a double whammy. It felt like that to me. It's not just like messing up. It was like giving up. It was crazy. But I kind of realized, like, well, I'm just sick of feeling this way, and there's no point in me feeling this way, because I had the realization that, tomorrow's a new day. I'm going to go home, get home to Nashville. I'm going to see my wife. I'm going to see, I can call my family. I'm going to see my dog, just all the things, all the like unconditional love pieces like of my life kind of occurred to me. And I just realized, like, that's actually what matters more than any of this stuff. And it was very freeing, because then I wasn't so attached to that feeling of feeling bad, and I actually could kind of like separate from it and look at it a little bit from afar and realize like why I had gotten so attached. And it kind of, if I just played that thing and had like done, let's say I nailed it, let's say I really knocked it out of the park, or even if I just did it pretty well, like pass fail, if I'd passed, I wouldn't have actually grown in any way. Nothing good would have come from that. I just would have played it and had that little dark little part in the back of my brain would have been like, yeah, you showed him, or whatever, I'm not proud of that. I don't want to be that guy, but I think we all have that in us, and the fact that it was such a fail actually wound up being this incredible opportunity to grow and learn and gain a lot of insight about myself and about that process of working on things and why we work on things and how we work on things. And it's not to say, by the way, that I'm free of that little guy back there, because he's still in there. But I think I know him now. I know him a lot more clearly than I did before, and that's been really valuable. And I think for all of us, if we get nervous, I think a lot of us kind of can relate to this experience of, you're at home playing in your living room or whatever, and nobody's around, and you're doing great. You're just kind of in a flow state. You're killing it, and you're feeling good, and it's just fun. It's joyful, or it's just connected, or you're just present. You're just so present. Maybe it's not even fun. You're just like you're in it. But we all know that that's like the highest state to be as a human. Just when you're just fully present.
Maybe you have like a framework or a way of thinking about this, but how do you conceptualize mindful practice? And maybe can you walk us through what that looks like for you?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of things you can do. I mean, when I was really being conscientious about that, which I'm not as much these days, but I've learned that it's good, so it's like I should get back into it. But just honestly, just meditating for me was useful. Like right before I'd practice, just take 5-10 minutes and just like focus on your breathing. That can be helpful. But just having a goal in mind of what you want to get better at.
What do those look like for you? Is it like how specific is it?
Well, for instance, that thing I mentioned earlier about like half diminished chords. Like there was this tune, I couldn't play the tune, so I sat down to play. I hadn't touched the guitar because, again, fatherhood. Like I hadn't really touched the guitar in like a week, and I had some recording coming up in a few days. So I wanted to find something that was going to be engaging to me, because it doesn't work for me to just sit down and be like, I need to practice this and I'm going to be a disciplinarian, like military school, like practicing. That's like, I can't do that. I'm not. It won't work for me. But I can get really engaged. I know that the trick is being curious and engaged. How can I be curious and engaged? Well, okay, what's something I can't do? And so for whatever reason, I mean, I'm just telling you how, like, what happened this last week. Um, it was like, okay, there's that cool, like, Steve Swallow tune, Falling Grace. And I never could really play it, even though my buddy showed it to me like a year and a half ago. I was like, let's play that for a little while. And I played it and realized, yeah, I couldn't play it. And I realized that, but it was fascinating to me. It was like, I want to get better at this. I suck at it. And I'm going to keep working on it because it's fun, because I can't do it. And kind of learning to love that feeling, and learning, to me, it's almost like the learning to love, somehow that gives birth to curiosity, that gives birth to this like thread of something that, like, I want to follow. I know if I like follow that or keep unspooling it or whatever the analogy is, like, that's fun to me. I like that. But then, I realized like, I'm messing up when I get to this half diminished thing every time. I can't play anything that I like or is coherent. In fact, I get lost on the fingerboard. I'm kind of losing the keys changing a bunch, but I'm also losing my thing. And so then it was like, oh, okay, there's this really practical, now all of a sudden, okay, I've got something practical to work on, because I've realized I cannot play. I don't understand about half diminished chords. I don't really. And it's not enough for me to just try and learn like half diminished arpeggio. It's like, I need to learn it a little more deeply than that. But how's that going to happen? I don't know. Okay, so maybe my goal for the next little while is to actually really learn something about half diminished chords. So like any triad or any seventh chord can be seen as two triads. Like, so it's like a G major 7. You've got like you've got a G triad. We've got G, B, and D. G, B, D, G major triad. But we also have, like, in this kind of garden variety guy, or any G major 7, there's also, F sharp, B, and D, or B, D, and F sharp, which is B minor. So all triads are like that. If you look at an A minor 7, there's like A minor, A, C, and E, A, C, and E. That's a triad. But you also have a C major, right? C, E, and G. And so for all of these, you have two triads. So, okay, that means seventh chords have two triads in them. So I was like, a half diminished chord is a seventh chord. Can I simplify that somehow? Because the big block of it isn't making sense to me. Okay, well, what are the two triads? The first one, I guess, is a diminished triad. The second one, which I'm not as up on that, but the second one, look at that. I can see it right here when I play the chord. I can just see that shape. It's A minor. Okay, now how's that relate to the root? Okay, A minor. Oh, it's a minor triad, and it's just up. And I just messed with it, and I was like, oh, it's a minor triad that's up a minor third. Okay, and all of a sudden, okay, cool. If I'd stopped practicing that day right there, that would have been a great insight, because I was like, I need to learn something more about half diminished chords. But I had some more time, and I just kept working on it. And I don't know, you just keep plowing away on that idea, and I started peeling away different layers of the onion. I'm still not, I would rank myself as a novice on half diminished chords. Now that I have a game plan, I still am, a 2 out of 10 of where I'd like to be. But at least I've really grown. I've set an intention, and I've achieved something there, and that feels good. And you just kind of keep working with it. And
it's really a process of like deconstruction. Like, I've got this problem I'm running into, and how do I break it into little tiny bits and then really conceptualize the whole thing?
To me, it's all about deconstruction. And I will say the people I know who are like the most, who I think most people would regard as some of the most, brilliant instrumentalists on the planet. People like Julian or Chris Thiele, or people like that. They are, what I notice about them is two things. They have kind of a fairly inexhaustible. They have just an enormous innate drive. they're just going to keep working. Their engine to kind of go forward is very powerful. But I think almost don't want to. I shouldn't have said that first, because I think people would be like, oh well, that's just their thing. I can't have that engine, because that does feel innate somehow. I think the main thing is that they actually are just relentless and really great problem solvers. They're really good and really comfortable with the process of encountering a problem and looking for a novel solution to it. They're not content to give up on a problem and feel there's only one way to deal with that problem. They have a lot of resourcefulness with how they will approach a problem. And I think it's that willingness to kind of break things down, take it apart, try and see what it is on an elemental level, that allows you to have insights about things. And so I like doing that too. But it's almost like problem solving and taking it down to the elemental level.
I love that. Well, I know you've got some kiddos to pick up here, so I'm curious if you would be open to playing a quick tune before you go.
Oh man, I'll try. Yeah. Let's see. My hands are officially frozen at this point. So. It's a cold room. It's a cold room. Yeah. Let's see. What should I play?
That's awesome.
A little chunky there.
No, it's great.
I'm curious about your right hand. I know there are some competing philosophies around like pinning the hand to the What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, so honestly, I'm not to be excuse guy, but since we're talking about it, my hands feel very cold.
Yeah, we're in like a 60-degree room right now.
Yeah. And so actually, I noticed my fingers. These guys were flopping a lot more. They were more down than I think they are when I'm warm.
Yeah.
Do you typically hover the hand, or do you?
No, I kind of do I do sort of a hybrid. I definitely have like, jack of all trades, master of none when it comes to the right hand, especially when you got people like Jake Workman, who's like just he's like the ultimate state of the art. Like, I mean, just his right hand is incredible, and he can play everything so at like a billion miles an hour, so fast and clean, and it makes a beautiful sound and everything. My thing is like, I kind of
the Tony Tuck.
Yeah, there's a little bit of I'm a little bit of a descendant of Tony in that way, where you know, a lot of what Tony would do is he optimized his right hand for everything was for sound, everything was for like tone, and not necessarily for a certain kind of efficiency where you've had like a new breed of players like Jake or you know Seth Taylor, Sean Richardson, or like Jake Eddy. You know, these amazing players who can do everything and play gutsy, but also have this like Cody Kilby had this crazy facility. Tony was like, he didn't have that same kind of facility, but every note that he played had this weird, I don't know, like gut resonance or something like that. And that was, so his technique was built around optimizing that sound, I think. And so he would do this crazy thing where, you know, he would sweep, but it wasn't like Frank Gambale like shred sweeping. It was just because he would flip the pick backwards. He would go like this. You get a slightly different attack on the string. Your thumb is locked, so there's actually, it's more stout. There's not like the same kind of give there, but also the way the string interacts with the winding of the or the pick interacts with the winding is different. You get like a cleaner sound that way. He would do all kinds of crazy things like that, and a lot of when he would also kind of play downstrokes by essentially taking his fingers, and he would do this, and if we put our fingers on the string, and if I just do this, it's going to have the effect. The string's not going anywhere. So if I close my fingers, it's going to have the effect of pulling the pick down. And then you get a slightly different sound when you play that way. And I like that sound. But I also find, you know, there are some things, again, I don't know if I can even do it right now, but there's some kinds of things like that would be a lot easier. That's harder to do if you're kind of locked down. You know, to have your hand floating freely enables certain kinds of things to happen. So I kind of do both, and I feel like it kind of leads me to, you know, not. It's a little bit of the jack of all trades kind of thing. But I kind of value in my musical life, especially in Punch Brothers, you know, where I have to match Chris Thiele a lot of times and play phrases and match that rhythmic feel. It's like, for me to be able to have that floating thing, it's like a little bit more, you know, it's just kind of this light, fast kind of thing. But I love, you know, Tony's my guy, so I got to have that grounded thing. So yeah, I kind of go both ways.
Well, that's super cool. Hey, I appreciate you coming out and playing us a tune and for the chat. This was really cool.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here.
Cool.